The arena held 20,000 people, but in that moment, it became silent enough to hear a single heartbeat. Adele Adkins stood center stage at London's O2 Arena on March 15, 2016, 70 minutes into what critics would later call one of her most powerful performances, when something completely unexpected happened. A child's voice cut through the roar of the crowd, a voice so small and vulnerable that it stopped one of the world's biggest artists mid-song, and what happened next would become one of the most shared moments in concert history. A moment that revealed something profound about fame, compassion, and what it truly means to connect with another human being. If you want to see more stories about the moments that define our greatest artists, subscribe and hit the bell, because what Adele did next wasn't in any script, it wasn't rehearsed, and it changed everyone in that arena forever. To understand the weight of this moment, you need to understand where Adele was in her life. March 2016 marked her return to touring after a 3-year hiatus following the birth of her son Angelo. Her album 25 had shattered records, selling over 3 million copies in its first week in the United States alone, and the pressure was immense. The O2 Arena, a venue she'd played before her break, now felt different. She was different. Motherhood had softened some edges while sharpening others. She'd spoken publicly about postpartum depression, about the guilt of leaving her toddler to perform, about the constant internal war between Adele the artist and Adele the mom. That night's setlist included Hello, When We Were Young, and Someone Like You, songs that demanded emotional excavation, songs that left her raw. The venue's technical specifications were unforgiving, every crack in the voice amplified, every hesitation magnified across massive LED screens that flanked the stage. She wore a custom black Burberry gown, her hair in her signature beehive, her makeup flawless, but those who knew her could see the exhaustion behind her eyes. She'd been touring for 6 weeks straight, living in hotels, pumping breast milk in dressing rooms between sound checks, FaceTiming her son before each show, even though he was usually too young to engage meaningfully. The stakes weren't just professional, they were deeply personal. The crowd that night was typical for an Adele concert, which is to say, it wasn't typical at all. Unlike the screaming masses at pop concerts, Adele's audiences skewed older, more diverse, filled with people who'd survived divorces and heartbreaks and losses, people who saw their own stories reflected in her lyrics. Seated in section 112, row K, was Sarah Mitchell, a 34-year-old nurse from Manchester who'd saved for 8 months to afford the ticket. 3 rows behind her sat Marcus and James Chen, a couple celebrating their 10th anniversary. In the VIP section, music producer Mark Ronson watched with professional admiration, noting how Adele controlled dynamics without sacrificing authenticity. And scattered throughout the arena were families, parents who'd brought children, some as young as 7 or 8, exposing them early to what real vocal talent sounded like. Among these families was the Edwards family from Brighton, Father Tom, Mother Linda, and their 9-year-old daughter Grace, who sat in section 105, close enough to see Adele's expressions, but far enough that she felt like a distant star. Grace had begged to come, had promised good behavior, had learned every word to every song. She wore a homemade sign that read, "Adele, you're my hero," in glitter pen, and she clutched it like a talisman. What none of them knew was that Grace had been diagnosed with selective mutism 2 years earlier, a condition that made speaking in public situations psychologically impossible for her, a silence that isolated her at school and made simple social interactions feel like crossing minefields. 73 minutes into the concert, Adele transitioned from Skyfall into an acoustic arrangement of Make You Feel My Love, a Bob Dylan cover she'd transformed into something entirely her own. This was meant to be an intimate moment, just her voice and a piano played by her longtime accompanist, Mike. The arena lights dimmed to near darkness, except for a single spotlight. She sat on a stool, her dress pooling around her, and began the first verse with that signature rasp that somehow conveyed both strength and fragility. The crowd swayed, thousands of phone lights creating a constellation. She closed her eyes during the second verse, lost in the emotional landscape of the song when she heard it. A child's voice, thin and breaking, trying to sing along but off-key, the words garbled by tears. Most performers would have ignored it, would have stayed in the performance bubble, but Adele's eyes snapped open. She stopped singing mid-phrase, held up her hand to Mike, who immediately lifted his fingers from the keys, and the sudden silence was shocking. 20,000 people held their breath. Adele stood from the stool, shielding her eyes against the spotlight, scanning the darkness beyond the stage. "Who's that?" she called out, her speaking voice thick with her North London accent, completely different from her singing voice. "Who's crying, love? Where are you?" The crowd began murmuring, heads turning, trying to locate the source. In section 105, Grace Edwards had been singing along quietly, her selective mutism somehow bypassed by the anonymity of the crowd and the safety of music, when emotion overwhelmed her. The lyrics about offering love during storms, about keeping someone warm and dry, reminded her of her mother during hospital visits. And suddenly she was crying, trying to sing through tears, her voice escaping louder than she'd intended. When Adele stopped, when that spotlight swept in their direction, Grace froze. Her father Tom instinctively put his arm around her, whispering, "It's okay, sweetheart," while her mother Linda felt her own throat tighten. Around them, people were staring, some with sympathy, others with irritation at the interruption. A security guard started moving toward their section, presumably to address a disturbance. That's when Adele's voice rang out again, louder this time, with an edge of protectiveness. No, don't you dare make her feel bad. Where is she? Someone point me there." A dozen arms raised, fingers pointing toward section 105. Adele squinted, then gestured to her lighting director. "Can we get a light over there? I need to see her face." A spotlight swung away from the stage and illuminated Grace Edwards, this tiny girl with brown hair in 2 braids, clutching a glitter sign, her face streaked with tears, looking absolutely terrified. The image appeared on the massive screens flanking the stage, magnified to 50 feet tall. 20,000 people saw her simultaneously. Most children would have crumbled under that attention, but something in Adele's voice, something in the way she was leaning forward with genuine concern, kept Grace from looking away. Adele pressed her hand to her chest, her own eyes visibly filling. "Oh, darling," she said, her voice carrying the particular tenderness of someone who understands, not just observes, pain. "How old are you, sweetheart?" Grace's mouth opened, but no sound came. Her mother, Linda, visible beside her on the screen, gently rubbed her back. The arena waited. Adele seemed to sense the struggle. "It's all right, love, you don't have to say anything. But I need you to know something. You see all these people?" She gestured broadly at the crowd. "Every single one of them has cried to my songs. Every single one. That's not something to be ashamed of. That's brave. Do you know why you're crying?" Grace shook her head slightly. Adele nodded as if this made perfect sense. "Sometimes we don't know. Sometimes the music just reaches in and pulls something out that we didn't know needed to come out. And that's exactly what it's supposed to do." The arena remained absolutely silent, thousands of strangers collectively holding space for this intimate exchange. Adele walked to the edge of the stage, as close to section 105 as the structure allowed, and sat down, her legs dangling over the edge, her expensive gown be damned. "I'm a mum now," she continued, her speaking voice softer now but still amplified by her microphone. "And my boy, he's about your age, maybe a bit younger, and sometimes he gets overwhelmed too. Sometimes big feelings don't have words, you know? They just have tears, or silence, or music." She paused, seeming to make a decision. "What's your name, darling?" This time, miraculously, Grace managed to whisper, "Grace," though it was so quiet that Adele had to ask the people around Grace, who called out, "Her name is Grace!" Adele's face broke into a huge smile. "Grace, that's a beautiful name. Grace, I want you to do something for me. I want you to take a deep breath in through your nose." She demonstrated dramatically, her chest rising, "and out through your mouth." She exhaled audibly. "Can you do that with me?" 20,000 people watched this multi-platinum artist lead a breathing exercise with a crying child. Grace nodded and breathed, her small shoulders rising and falling. "Good girl. Now, I'm going to sing this song again, and this time, I'm singing it for you. Not for anyone else, just for Grace. And if you want to sing along, even if it's just in your head, that's perfect. And if you want to cry, that's perfect too. There's no wrong way to feel music." What happened next became the moment that defined not just the concert, but something larger about Adele's artistry and character. She turned to Mike at the piano and said, "From the top, love, and keep it gentle." Then she repositioned herself on the edge of the stage, facing section 105, and began, "Make You Feel My Love" again. But this time, her delivery changed. The runs were simpler, the phrasing more direct, the emotional intensity focused and intimate rather than grand. She sang it like a lullaby, like a mother singing to a frightened child, and every person in that arena felt like they were witnessing something sacred. Grace stopped crying. Her face, still magnified on the screens, transformed from distress to wonder. Halfway through the song, her lips began moving, singing along silently. By the final chorus, she was smiling through drying tears. When Adele hit the last note and let it fade into silence, the arena erupted not with the usual concert roar, but with something different, something that sounded like collective catharsis. People were crying everywhere, in every section, strangers hugging strangers. Adele stood and bowed slightly toward Grace. "Thank you for being brave enough to feel things, Grace. Don't ever lose that." Then she addressed the crowd. "And thank you all for understanding that sometimes we have to stop the show for the things that matter. Music isn't about perfection, it's about connection. If we can't stop to hold space for a crying child, what's the bloody point of any of this?" The applause was thunderous. Someone near. Grace handed her mother Linda a tissue, and Tom Edwards felt tears running down his own face, overwhelmed by the grace, the literal grace, with which Adele had handled the situation. Linda would later tell reporters that Grace, who had barely spoken at school in 2 years, talked nonstop on the car ride home, recounting every second of the interaction, the encounter having somehow created a small crack in the wall of her selective mutism. The concert continued, but the energy had shifted into something more communal, more forgiving. Adele herself seemed lighter, as if the spontaneous moment had reconnected her to why she performed in the first place. After the show, backstage, she told her manager that stopping had felt instinctual, that hearing that child's voice had bypassed her performer brain and activated her mother brain, that she couldn't have continued if she'd tried. Video of the interaction was uploaded to YouTube within hours and went viral, accumulating over 40 million views in the first week. News outlets ran headlines like, "Adele stops concert for crying girl," and "The moment that proves Adele is different." Think pieces analyzed her authenticity, her emotional intelligence, her willingness to prioritize humanity over showmanship. But perhaps more significantly, Grace Edwards became a symbol for thousands of children and adults struggling with selective mutism, anxiety disorders, and emotional regulation challenges. Her parents received messages from around the world, people sharing their own stories, thanking Grace for being visible in her vulnerability. The long-term impact rippled outward in unexpected ways. Adele incorporated more spontaneous crowd interactions into subsequent tour dates, sometimes stopping to acknowledge individuals, creating space for unscripted humanity. Other major artists began following suit, recognizing that perfect performances often matter less than authentic connections. Mental health organizations cited the incident as an example of public figures using their platforms to destigmatize emotional expression. And for the Edwards family, life changed in small but meaningful ways. Grace began speaking more at school, slowly, haltingly, but increasingly. She credited Adele with showing her that big feelings weren't shameful, but were instead evidence of being alive and present. 3 months after the concert, Grace performed in her school's talent show, singing "Make You Feel My Love." And though her voice shook and she cried halfway through, she finished, and her classmates gave her a standing ovation. Her parents watched from the audience, remembering that night at the O2 Arena, grateful that their daughter had been seen, truly seen, by someone who understood that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stop everything and pay attention. So here's the question worth considering. In a world that constantly demands we keep moving, keep performing, keep producing, what would change if we all adopted Adele's instinct to stop for the crying child, whether that child is someone else or the frightened, overwhelmed part of ourselves? If this story reminded you why human connection matters more than flawless execution, share it with someone who needs that reminder today, and subscribe for more stories about the moments that reveal who we really are.